The scent of smoked turkey and simmering collard greens had seeped into the very wallpaper of the Brooklyn brownstone, a rich, savory perfume that had defined Sunday afternoons for 3 generations. Melissa stood at the vintage cast-iron stove, a sturdy, silver-haired matriarch of 68, methodically stirring a heavy pot. Her hands, mapped with the faint, raised lines of veins, were the hands of a retired trauma nurse, steady, capable, and intimately acquainted with the fragility of life. Today, however, those hands were focused on a different kind of preservation, the weekly Sunday family dinner. The kitchen was the beating heart of the house. It wasn't an open-concept stainless steel marvel like the ones featured in the glossy magazines that were currently flooding the neighborhood. It was lived in. The oak cabinets, polished by decades of use, held mismatched Pyrex dishes and spice racks alphabetized by a woman who liked order in a chaotic world. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the warm air and catching the framed photographs lining the hallway. Graduations, weddings, baptisms, and faded sepia portraits of grandparents who had traveled north during the Great Migration to secure this very piece of land. Melissa wiped her brow with the back of her wrist and adjusted her apron. Outside her frosted window, the landscape of Bedford-Stuyvesant was changing with a ruthless, sweeping speed. Where Mr. Henderson's bodega used to sell loose teas and Jamaican patties, a minimalist coffee shop now peddled $7 oat milk lattes. The crumbling brick facades down the street had been power washed, painted slate gray, and flipped by aggressive developers. Gentrification was a creeping tide, and Melissa's 3-story brownstone, completely paid off, meticulously maintained, and sitting on a double lot, was an island of deep, generational wealth surrounded by hungry sharks. She received letters weekly. Cash offer for your home. Close in 7 days. She used them as scrap paper to write her grocery lists. The heavy oak front door groaned open, snapping Melissa from her thoughts. The familiar heavy footfalls of her son, Marcus, echoed in the foyer, followed by the sharp, rhythmic click-clack of designer heels. "Ma, we're here!" Marcus called out, his voice lacking its usual booming resonance. "In the kitchen, baby," Melissa replied, turning down the heat on the stove. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, and Melissa's trained clinical eye instantly did a sweep. At 32, her son was a handsome man, tall and broad-shouldered like his late father. But today, the skin under his eyes was bruised with exhaustion, a deep, shadowy purple. His shoulders slumped beneath his tailored blazer, and the smile he offered her was brittle, not quite reaching his eyes. He looked like a man carrying an invisible, crushing weight. Close behind him was Chloe. At 30, Chloe was a vision of corporate perfection. Her sleek, straightened hair didn't have a single strand out of place. She wore a tailored beige trench coat over a minimalist silk blouse, looking as though she had just stepped out of a boardroom rather than walking into a family home for a Sunday roast. "Hi, Melissa," Chloe said, offering a tight, practiced smile. She didn't step forward for a hug. Instead, she let her eyes wander around the kitchen, her gaze lingering just a second too long on the slightly worn linoleum floor and the vintage floral wallpaper. It was a look Melissa knew well, the assessing, calculating look of an appraiser determining depreciation. "Hello, Chloe. Marcus," Melissa said, wiping her hands on a towel and walking over to pull her son into a deep embrace. She felt the rigid tension in his back. "You look tired, son. You boys working you to the bone at the startup?" Marcus pulled away, clearing his throat and avoiding her direct gaze. "Just, you know how it is, Ma. Q3 projections, funding rounds. It's a grind." "Well, sit down. The mac and cheese just came out of the oven. Wash up," Melissa instructed gently, though her intuition flared. Marcus had always been a terrible liar. When he was 10 and broke a window, he couldn't look her in the eye. He was doing it now, staring intently at the salt shaker on the dining table. As they moved to the formal dining room, the atmosphere grew dense. The dining table, a massive piece of solid mahogany that Melissa's husband Robert had bought for their 5th anniversary, was set with the good china. Chloe took her seat carefully, smoothing her skirt. "This house is always so warm, Melissa," she said, though the word warm sounded dangerously close to stuffy in her clipped, polished tone. "I noticed the Miller house down the block just sold. Did you see what it went for?" Melissa spooned a generous portion of collard greens onto Marcus's plate before serving herself. "I don't pay much mind to the neighbors' pockets, Chloe. Pass the rolls, please." $3.2 million, Chloe stated, not missing a beat. ignoring the request for the rolls. Her eyes gleamed with a sharp, metallic intensity. And they didn't even have the original molding like you do, or the backyard space. The market here is absolutely liquid right now. It's unprecedented. Melissa paused, her silver serving spoon hovering over the bowl. She looked across the table at her daughter-in-law. Chloe was a pragmatic woman, raised in a turbulent, low-income household. Melissa understood the girl's trauma-driven obsession with financial security, but she despised the way Chloe viewed everything and everyone as an asset to be leveraged. "This isn't the market, Chloe," Melissa said, her voice smooth but carrying the unmistakable weight of a matriarch. "This is a home. It's where Marcus took his first steps. It's where Robert and I built a life. You don't put a price tag on a legacy." Chloe offered a patronizing, pitying smile. "Of course, Melissa. Sentimental value is lovely, but from a purely wealth management perspective, sitting on millions of dollars of equity while dealing with the upkeep of a 100-year-old property, it's just not an efficient allocation of resources, especially for someone your age living here all alone." Someone your age, all alone. The words dropped onto the table like stones. Melissa felt a prickle of heat at the base of her neck. It wasn't the first time Chloe had brought up the size of the house or Melissa's age, but there was a new, aggressive edge to it today, an urgency. Melissa looked at her son, expecting him to intervene, to shut down the disrespect as he usually did. Marcus, however, was violently focused on cutting a piece of turkey he hadn't even taken a bite of. His knuckles were white. "She has a point, Ma," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Taxes are going up. The stairs are steep. Maybe it's time to start thinking about something more manageable." Silence fell over the dining room, heavy and absolute. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Melissa set her fork down softly. She didn't yell. She didn't show the sudden, sharp pain that twisted in her chest. 30 years working the emergency room had taught her how to compartmentalize shock. "Manageable," Melissa repeated, testing the word on her tongue. She looked at her son, really looked at him. She saw the fraying edge of his expensive Italian shirt cuffs. She noticed that the Rolex he usually wore, a gift to himself when his company secured its first seed funding, was missing from his wrist. A cold realization began to wash over her. This wasn't just Chloe's usual corporate condescension. This was a coordinated effort. Marcus wasn't agreeing with his wife out of submission. He was agreeing out of desperation. "I manage just fine, Marcus," Melissa said, her tone level and unyielding. "I climb those stairs 20 times a day. I paid the taxes last month, same as I have for 40 years. This house is paid for. The roof is new. What exactly is it that you think I can't manage?" Marcus flinched. He finally looked up, and the raw panic in his eyes made Melissa's breath hitch. "Ma, things are just complicated right now. The economy is shifting. We just worry about you, that's all. We want you to be comfortable." "I am comfortable," Melissa replied firmly. She turned her sharp gaze to Chloe, who was watching the exchange with the cool detachment of a predator observing a wounded animal. "And I would appreciate it if we changed the subject. We are eating." The rest of the meal was a grueling exercise in endurance. The soul food, usually a source of comfort and joy, tasted like ash in Melissa's mouth. Chloe expertly steered the conversation toward her recent promotion at the investment firm, peppering her speech with jargon, portfolio diversification, liquidity, ROI, words that felt less like conversation and more like a targeted psychological campaign. Marcus remained largely silent, mechanically eating his food, checking his phone under the table every few minutes. Every time the screen lit up, his jaw clenched tighter. When dinner finally concluded, Chloe immediately stood up. "I'll help you clear the table, Melissa." "No need," Melissa said, already stacking plates. "I prefer to do my kitchen my way. Marcus, why don't you come help me pack up some leftovers for you two?" It was a clear command, a demand for a private audience. Chloe's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded, retreating to the living room to scroll through her phone. In the kitchen, the air was thick. Melissa handed Marcus a plastic container, watching him scoop mac and cheese into it with trembling hands. "Talk to me, Marcus," she said, keeping her voice low so it wouldn't carry down the hall. "There's nothing to talk about, Ma," he deflected, snapping the lid onto the container. "Don't lie to me. I carried you for 9 months and raised you for 32 years. I know when you're drowning." Melissa stepped closer, placing a warm hand on his arm. "Is it the business? Are you in trouble?" Marcus closed his eyes. For a fraction of a second, the polished, successful tech entrepreneur facade crumbled, leaving behind the terrified little boy who used to hide behind her skirts during thunderstorms. He opened his mouth to speak, and Melissa saw the truth right on the edge of his lips. But then, Chloe's voice drifted from the living room, crisp and loud. "Marcus, honey, did you tell your mom about the brochure we brought? The one for the Silver Pines community?" Marcus's posture instantly rigidified. The wall slammed back down, thicker and higher than before. He pulled his arm away from his mother's touch. "It's just an idea, Ma," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "A luxury retirement community. Just look at the brochure. Nobody is forcing you to do anything, but you can't live in the past forever." Before Melissa could respond, he grabbed the bag of leftovers and walked out of the kitchen. Melissa stood alone in the quiet warmth of her kitchen, listening to the front door open and close. The silence they left behind was deafening. She walked slowly into the living room. On the coffee table, resting next to a framed photo of Robert holding a newborn Marcus, was a glossy, heavy-stock brochure. Silver Pines, Elevated Senior Living. Melissa picked it up. It featured pictures of smiling, frail elderly people being guided by nurses in pristine white uniforms. It promised comprehensive medical oversight and asset management services. It wasn't a brochure for an apartment. It was a brochure for an institution. She felt a deep, rumbling anger ignite in her chest, replacing the hurt. They didn't just want her out of the house. They wanted to strip her of her autonomy. They were framing her independence as a liability. Chloe was a shark, that much was clear. But Marcus? Marcus was complicit. He was willing to sacrifice his mother's sanctuary, the very foundation of his family's legacy, to save himself from whatever financial abyss he had fallen into. Melissa tossed the brochure into the trash can. She walked over to the large bay window and looked out at the street. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows over the brownstones. She was a black woman in America who had survived the turbulent 60s, worked 30 years in the grueling environment of a city hospital, and buried the love of her life. She had fought tooth and nail to secure her piece of the world. She knew how to bandage a wound, but more importantly, she knew how to diagnose a disease before it spread. Her daughter-in-law wanted a war over the deed to the house. Her son was too cowardly to stop it. "All right," Melissa whispered to the empty room, her reflection in the glass looking back at her with eyes of flint and steel. "If it's a fight they want for this house, they're going to find out I'm the one who laid the bricks." She turned away from the window, walked to the antique writing desk in the corner, and pulled out her personal directory. She didn't need to look up the number. She dialed it from memory. "Evelyn," Melissa said when the line connected, speaking to her oldest friend and confidant. "I need you to do some digging in the neighborhood for me, and get me the number of that bulldog of a lawyer you used for your estate planning. The storm is coming to my front door." The Grapevine in Bedford-Stuyvesant did not require a fiber-optic internet connection, nor did it rely on the whims of social media algorithms. It operated on a frequency far older and infinitely more reliable, the collective, watchful eyes of the neighborhood's matriarchs. On Tuesday morning, 2 days after the disastrous Sunday dinner, Melissa sat in a corner booth at Miss Clara's, a modest, decades-old diner that had somehow survived the onslaught of artisanal bakeries moving onto the avenue. Across from her sat Evelyn, a woman whose brightly patterned silk head wrap matched her fiercely sharp personality. Evelyn was a retired Brooklyn court clerk. She knew every judge, every paralegal, and how to unearth buried public records faster than a private investigator. Evelyn slid a manila folder across the laminated table, pushing aside her half-eaten plate of grits. "You were right to trust your gut, Melissa," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial register. "I had my nephew, David, the one who works down at that venture capital firm in Manhattan, run some quiet background checks on Marcus's company. OmniSync, right?" Melissa nodded, wrapping her hands around her thick ceramic coffee mug to steady them. "That's the one. He said they were developing some kind of logistics software. Said they were doing brilliantly." "They were," Evelyn corrected gently, her eyes full of sorrow for her friend. "Key word is were. 2 years ago, they lost their biggest contract. The company has been hemorrhaging cash ever since. David said they've missed 3 payroll cycles this year alone. But that's not the worst part, Melissa." Melissa's heart executed a slow, painful roll in her chest, but her face remained an impassive mask. "Give it to me straight, Evie. No sugar." Evelyn tapped a heavily manicured fingernail against the closed folder. When the traditional banks cut him off, Marcus got desperate. He went looking for private equity, but what he actually found were glorified loan sharks wearing Tom Ford suits. A group called Vanguard Capital. They prey on desperate startups. They gave Marcus a bridge loan of $800,000, but the terms are predatory, 25% interest, compounding monthly. And Melissa? He signed a personal guarantee. The diner around them seemed to fade into a muted, distant hum. Melissa knew exactly what a personal guarantee meant. "They can come after everything he owns," she whispered. Worse, Evelyn leaned in closer. To secure the loan, he falsified his asset declarations. He claimed he had liquid equity he didn't possess. If Vanguard decides to call the loan in, which David says they are preparing to do by the end of the month, Marcus won't just face bankruptcy. Vanguard will hand the fraudulent declarations over to the district attorney. They will press criminal charges. Your boy is looking at prison time for wire fraud. Melissa closed her eyes. The image of Marcus at the dining table, his hands trembling as he packed leftover macaroni, suddenly snapped into devastating clarity. He wasn't just stressed about a corporate grind. He was a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows, listening to the lever being pulled. "And Chloe?" Melissa asked, her voice tight. "Does she know?" "Oh, she knows," Evelyn scoffed, a sound of pure disdain. David pulled the LLC filings. Chloe's name was quietly removed from all OmniSync corporate documents 3 weeks ago. She's insulating herself from the fallout. But she's still his wife. If he goes down, her pristine corporate reputation goes down with him. She will lose her job, her credit rating, her lifestyle. She is a woman backed into a corner, Melissa, and those are the most dangerous kind. Melissa opened her eyes, staring at the manila folder as if it were a venomous snake. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with a sickening click. The sudden urgency about the brownstone, the brochure for the nursing home, the patronizing talk about efficient asset allocation. They needed $3 million, fast, and the only life raft in sight was the deed to her home. "She's pushing him to liquidate me," Melissa said, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. "She wants to sell this brownstone, pay off the loan sharks to keep him out of jail, and probably pocket the rest to fund a fresh start. And my son, my Marcus, is too terrified to stop her." Evelyn reached across the table, covering Melissa's hand with her own. "I already spoke to Robert Hayes, the estate lawyer I told you about. He's expecting your call this afternoon. Melissa, you cannot let them blindside you. You have to strike first." "I won't just strike, Evie," Melissa said, sliding the folder into her leather tote bag. The shock was receding, rapidly replaced by the cold, calculated adrenaline of a trauma nurse entering a triage zone. "I'm going to let them think they have the upper hand. I need to see exactly how far my son is willing to go." 10 miles away, in a stark, minimalist apartment in Tribeca, Marcus was experiencing the very collapse his mother was discovering. He sat on the edge of a custom-made Italian leather sofa, his head buried in his hands. The large, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the Manhattan skyline, a view that cost him $6,000 a month, money he no longer had. His phone buzzed on the glass coffee table for the 5th time in an hour. The caller ID simply read, "Vanguard Management." Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was so tight he felt like he was suffocating. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of Richard Vance, the Vanguard executive who had visited his office yesterday. Vance hadn't yelled. He hadn't broken any furniture. He had simply sat in Marcus's chair, smiled a thin, bloodless smile, and said, 30 days, Marcus. After that, we don't just take the company. We take the apartment, the cars, and then we make a phone call to our friends at the prosecutor's office. Fraud is an ugly word for a bright young man like you. The sound of the front door opening made Marcus jump. Chloe walked in, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She dropped her designer handbag onto the kitchen island and walked straight to the living room. She didn't look like a loving wife returning to a distressed husband. She looked like a general surveying a losing battlefield. "They called my office today," Chloe said, her voice eerily calm. "Vanguard. They bypassed you and called my private line. They wanted to gently remind me of the impending deadline." Marcus looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Chloe, I don't know what to do. I'm out of time. I can't find another investor to buy out the debt. Nobody will touch OmniSync with those financials." "Of course they won't," "The company is a corpse, Marcus," Chloe snapped, finally letting her frustration crack through her polished veneer. She paced the length of the rug. "You lied to them, and you lied to me about the extent of this mess. Do you understand what happens if you are indicted? My firm will fire me the second the news hits. We will lose everything. We will be ruined." "I was trying to save it. We were so close to a breakthrough. Save the pitch for the judge, Marcus, because I don't care," Chloe cut him off coldly. She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes hard and calculating. "We have exactly one asset left that can cover an $800,000 debt and leave us enough capital to relocate and start over. Your mother's house." Marcus physically recoiled, shaking his head frantically. "No, no, Chloe, we talked about this. She's not going to sell. You heard her on Sunday. She will die in that house. I can't force her out." "You won't have to," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a soothing, dangerous purr. She walked over and sat next to him, placing a manicured hand on his knee. It was a calculated gesture of intimacy. "Marcus, look at her. She is 68 years old, living alone in a massive property she can barely maintain. She's getting forgetful. Did you see how she hesitated when serving the food on Sunday? How she repeated herself?" Marcus frowned, confused. "She didn't repeat herself. And her mind is perfectly sharp, Chloe. She does the NYT crossword in pen every morning." "She is declining, Marcus," Chloe repeated, staring unblinkingly into his eyes, silently forcing him to accept her narrative. "It is our responsibility to step in and manage her affairs before she hurts herself or gets scammed. We are doing this out of love." "What are you talking about?" Chloe unzipped her leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "I had a meeting today with Arthur Sterling. He's a wealth manager who specializes in elder care transitions. He has drafted a comprehensive power of attorney. It gives us total control over Melissa's medical and financial decisions, including the right to liquidate real estate assets for her benefit." Marcus stared at the papers as if they were radioactive. "A power of attorney? She'll never sign that. She's a retired nurse, Chloe. She knows exactly what these documents mean." "She won't know if she doesn't read the fine print," Chloe said smoothly. "Arthur is a master at this. He presents it as a standard retirement protection plan. We invite her to dinner at a neutral, upscale location. Arthur will be there. We ambush her with kindness, concern, and a lot of confusing financial jargon. We tell her this is just a precaution to protect her estate from the government. By the time she realizes what she's signed, the house will already be on the market, and we will have the Vanguard debt cleared." Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. This wasn't just lying. This was predatory. It was a violent theft wrapped in legal jargon. "It's my mother, Chloe. You're asking me to steal her home and lock her in a facility so I don't go to jail." "I am asking you to survive, Marcus." Chloe's voice cracked like a whip in the silent apartment. "I am asking you to fix the mess you made. If you don't do this, Vanguard destroys you. You will go to a federal penitentiary. Do you think Melissa wants to see her only son behind bars? If you really love her, you will take the burden of this house off her shoulders so you can remain a free man." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus looked at the legal documents, then out the window at the city he was about to lose, and finally at the cold, desperate face of his wife. The terror of prison, the complete destruction of his identity as a successful tech founder, overpowered his morality. The trapdoor was opening, and he was choosing to throw his mother under the wheels to stop his own fall. He slowly reached out and touched the power of attorney documents. His soul felt heavy, rotting inside his chest. "Okay," Marcus whispered, his voice entirely devoid of life. "What's the plan?" Chloe's posture relaxed, a triumphant predatory smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Call her. Tell her we want to make up for Sunday. Tell her we're taking her to Le Bernardin on Friday night. And tell her to bring her reading glasses." On Thursday afternoon, Melissa was in her garden, kneeling in the rich soil of her backyard, pruning her prize-winning rose bushes. The physical labor was grounding, keeping her anxiety at bay. Her phone rang from the pocket of her gardening apron. She pulled it out, wiped the dirt from the screen with her thumb, and saw Marcus's name. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and answered. "Hello, son." "Hi, Ma." Marcus's voice came through the speaker. He sounded strained, artificially cheerful, like a customer service representative reading from a script. "Listen, I wanted to apologize for how tense things got on Sunday. I've been incredibly stressed with work, and I didn't mean to bring that energy into your home." Melissa closed her eyes. "Oh, my sweet, foolish boy," she thought. "You have no idea the game you are trying to play." "Apology accepted, Marcus," she said, keeping her tone light, almost naive. "Work is work. You have to learn to leave it at the door." "I know, Ma. That's why Chloe and I want to make it up to you. We'd love to take you out to dinner tomorrow night. Just the three of us. We booked a table at that upscale French place in Midtown you've always wanted to try. We just want to treat you. Just the three of us." Melissa knew that was a lie. Evelyn's lawyer, Robert Hayes, had warned her exactly how this would play out. "They will corner you in a public place," Hayes had said. "They will bring a notary or a crooked financial advisor. They will rely on the fact that you won't want to make a scene in a fancy restaurant to pressure you into signing." "That sounds lovely, Marcus," Melissa said, a grim smile forming on her face. "I would love to have dinner with you and Chloe." "Great, great," Marcus said, the relief in his voice palpable, pathetic. "I'll send an Uber Black to pick you up at 7. See you tomorrow, Ma. I love you." "I love you too, Marcus," she replied softly. Melissa ended the call. She didn't go back to her roses. Instead, she stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and looked up at the towering, solid brick structure of her brownstone. It had stood through riots, through economic depressions, through gentrification, and through the loss of her husband. She walked back inside, heading straight for the heavy iron safe hidden behind the false panel in her bedroom closet. She spun the dial, pulled the heavy door open, and extracted a thick, blue legal binder. Printed on the front in stark black letters were the words, "The Melissa and Robert Estate, Irrevocable Trust." She ran her fingers over the embossed lettering. They thought they were dealing with an uninformed, sentimental old woman. They thought they could use her love for her son as a weapon against her. "They booked a table at a French restaurant," Melissa said to the empty room, her voice vibrating with a quiet, terrifying resolve. "But they don't know they just bought a ticket to a slaughterhouse." She placed the binder neatly into her designer leather tote bag right next to her reading glasses. The trap was set, but Chloe and Marcus had no idea who was really holding the trigger. The sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside Le Bernardin, its tires whispering against the damp Manhattan asphalt. The doorman, clad in an immaculate uniform, opened the rear door. Melissa stepped out onto the sidewalk, ignoring his offered hand with a polite but firm nod. She wore an emerald green silk dress that draped elegantly over her frame, paired with a strand of authentic pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. She carried herself not like an old woman transitioning into the twilight of her life, but like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. Her spine was steel, her expression unreadable. Inside her structured leather tote bag, resting heavy and cool against her side, was the blue binder. The interior of the restaurant was a masterclass in understated wealth. Subdued amber lighting washed over teak wood and plush carpeting. The air smelled of truffles, reduction sauces, and the cold metallic scent of expensive perfume. It was a place designed to make the uninitiated feel small and grateful. Melissa felt neither. The maitre d' led her through the hushed dining room to a secluded, semi-private booth in the back. As she approached, Melissa saw them. Marcus was already nursing a tumbler of amber liquid, his face paler than she had ever seen it. He looked physically ill, a fine sheen of sweat coating his forehead, despite the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. Chloe sat beside him, radiating a brittle, frantic energy. She wore a severe black dress, her posture rigid. And then there was the third chair. Sitting across from her son and daughter-in-law was a man Melissa did not know. He was in his late 40s, wearing a bespoke navy blue suit with a Windsor knotted silk tie. His hair was slicked back, and his smile was a millimeter too wide to be genuine. "Ma," Marcus croaked, standing up abruptly. He nearly knocked over his water glass. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Marcus," Melissa said, allowing him to pull out her chair. She sat down, placing her tote bag carefully on the empty seat beside her. She looked directly at the stranger. "I was under the impression this was a family dinner." Chloe smiled, a sharp white expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Melissa, this is Arthur Sterling. He's a senior partner at my firm's wealth management division. He happened to be dining here tonight, and I asked him to join us for a drink. I hope you don't mind." "A coincidence," Melissa said smoothly, unfolding her linen napkin and laying it across her lap. "How fortuitous." "A pleasure to meet you, Melissa," Arthur said. His voice was rich, modulated for maximum trustworthiness. It was a voice that had talked millions of dollars out of thousands of pockets. Chloe and Marcus speak the world of you. They've told me so much about your beautiful historic home in Brooklyn. I'm sure they have, Melissa replied, picking up her menu. Shall we order? I find that business discussions on an empty stomach often lead to poor decisions. The first hour of the dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Course after course of exquisitely plated, astronomically priced seafood arrived and departed. Melissa ate with genuine appetite, savoring a delicately seared scallop. Marcus barely touched his food, his leg bouncing nervously under the table, vibrating the floorboards. Chloe drank 3 glasses of Sancerre in rapid succession, her eyes darting between Arthur and Melissa. As the waiter cleared the plates for dessert, the atmosphere shifted. The pleasantries evaporated, replaced by a sudden, suffocating tension. The trap was springing. Arthur dabbed his mouth with a napkin and leaned forward, adopting a posture of deep, empathetic concern. Melissa, Chloe, and Marcus asked me to sit down with you tonight because they love you very much. They are deeply concerned about your well-being. Melissa took a sip of her sparkling water. Is that so? It is, Ma, Marcus interjected, his voice trembling. He reached across the table, trying to take her hand, but Melissa kept her fingers wrapped around her glass. You're living all alone in that massive house. The stairs are dangerous. And lately we've noticed you've been a little forgetful. Forgetful, Melissa repeated, her tone dangerously flat. Yes, Chloe chimed in, leaning forward. Last week, when we were over, you left the stove burner on after you took the pot off, and you called me by Marcus's ex-girlfriend's name twice. It's perfectly natural at your age, Melissa, but it's not safe. The cognitive load of managing an estate that size is just too much. Melissa looked at Chloe. The audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. She had never left a stove on in her life, and she certainly hadn't forgotten Chloe's name. It was classic gaslighting, an attempt to make her doubt her own sanity, laying the groundwork for a declaration of incompetence. So, Arthur continued, stepping smoothly into the manufactured opening, as a favor to Chloe, I've drawn up a comprehensive asset protection protocol. It's a standard procedure for high net worth individuals transitioning into their golden years. It simply grants Marcus the legal authority to help manage your finances, maintain your medical care, and if necessary, liquidate the Brooklyn property to fund a move into a luxury assisted living community, somewhere you will have 24-hour care. Arthur reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents printed on heavy legal paper. He slid them across the white tablecloth, stopping precisely in front of Melissa. He produced a gold Mont Blanc pen and set it beside the paper. It's a durable power of attorney, paired with an advanced healthcare directive, Arthur explained soothingly. It just takes the burden off your shoulders, Melissa. It lets you rest. Silence descended on the table. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a distant hum. Melissa looked down at the documents, then up at her son. Marcus, she said softly, look at me. Marcus swallowed hard. He lifted his eyes, meeting his mother's gaze. His face was a portrait of pure, agonizing guilt. Are you asking me to sign this? She asked. Are you asking me to sign away my home and my freedom? Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He looked like he was suffocating. Ma, please, just sign it. It's for the best. I promise I'll take care of you. Just sign the paper. He pushed the gold pen an inch closer to her hand. It was the ultimate betrayal. The boy she had rocked to sleep, the boy whose scraped knees she had bandaged, was willingly pushing her onto the tracks to stop his own train wreck. Melissa sighed. It was a heavy, mournful sound. She reached into her purse and pulled out her reading glasses, slipping them onto her face. Very well, let's see what we have here. Arthur and Chloe exchanged a microscopic glance of triumph. They thought they had won. They thought the old woman had broken under the weight of her son's pleading. Melissa opened the folder. She did not skim. For 10 agonizing minutes, she sat in absolute silence, reading the dense legal jargon line by line. The ticking clock of their anxiety grew deafening. Chloe began tapping her fingernails against her wine glass. Arthur cleared his throat twice. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. Finally, Melissa tapped a manicured fingernail against the second page. Clause 4A, she read aloud, her voice clear and authoritative, projecting just enough to command the space. The designated agent shall have the absolute right to sell, lease, or encumber any real property owned by the principal, and to deposit the proceeds into an account under the agent's sole control. My, that is incredibly broad, Arthur. And Clause 7. The agent may authorize the permanent transfer of the principal to a residential care facility against her stated wishes if deemed medically necessary. A blank check to lock me up. Arthur smiled, a patronizing, greasy expression. It's standard boilerplate language, Melissa, merely protective. Melissa took off her glasses and folded them slowly. She looked at Arthur with the clinical detachment of a nurse examining a malignant tumor. Arthur Sterling, she said, you are a very poor liar, and you have brought a butter knife to a gunfight. Arthur's smile faltered. Chloe stiffened. Melissa turned her piercing gaze to her son. The maternal warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, searing fire. You think I don't know, Marcus? She asked, her voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet register. You think I sit in that house baking pies and waiting to die? You think I don't know about OmniSync's failed contracts? Marcus stopped breathing. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a chalky, sickly gray. Ma, he whispered, paralyzed. You think I don't know about Vanguard Capital? Melissa continued, each word a hammer blow to the table. I know about the $800,000 bridge loan, Marcus. I know about the 25% compounding interest. And I know about the falsified asset declarations you signed. Chloe gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest. She stared at Melissa in absolute horror. Arthur Sterling slowly withdrew his hands from the table, his professional demeanor shattering. That's what this is, Melissa said, gesturing to the power of attorney with absolute disgust. This isn't about my cognitive decline. This isn't about my safety. This is about an $800,000 debt to a group of loan sharks and a looming indictment for federal wire fraud. You brought me here, to a public place, hoping I would be too polite to make a scene, so you could steal the deed to my home to keep yourself out of a federal penitentiary. Melissa, keep your voice down, Chloe hissed, glancing frantically at the neighboring tables. The sophisticated corporate shark was rapidly devolving into a panicked, cornered animal. You don't understand the severity of this. If Marcus goes down, we lose everything. You have millions of dollars sitting in that house doing nothing. It's just a building. It is my legacy, Melissa snapped, her voice finally rising, striking like a whip. It is the blood and sweat of your grandfather, Marcus. It is the roof your father put over your head. And you would sell it to a developer so they can turn it into a coffee shop, just to cover up your own cowardice and fraud? Ma, they're going to arrest me, Marcus sobbed, the dam finally breaking. Tears streamed down his face. Vanguard gave me 30 days. They're going to give the files to the DA. I'll go to prison, Ma. Please, I'm your son. You have to save me. It was the climax of their manipulation, the ultimate guilt trip. A mother's love weaponized against her. Melissa looked at her weeping son. Her heart broke into 1,000 irreparable pieces, but her spine remained steel. I would have given you the blood from my veins, Marcus, she said softly, the tragic truth hanging in the air between them. If you had come to me as a man, if you had sat at my kitchen table, confessed your failure, and asked for help, I would have emptied my retirement accounts. I would have scrubbed floors to help you pay it back. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. But you didn't do that. You brought a snake into my home. You tried to gaslight me. You tried to declare me legally incompetent, strip me of my dignity, and throw me into an institution so you could rob me blind in the dark. Chloe slammed her hand on the table, abandoning all pretense. Enough with the melodrama. He is going to jail, Melissa. Sign the damn papers so we can list the house tomorrow, or you will watch your only son be taken away in handcuffs. I couldn't sign them even if I wanted to, Chloe, Melissa said calmly. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out the heavy blue binder. She dropped it onto the table with a resounding thud that made the silverware rattle. The gold-embossed letters caught the ambient light. The Melissa and Robert Estate. Irrevocable Trust. Arthur Sterling stared at the binder. He knew exactly what it was. The blood drained from his slick face. 5 years ago, Melissa said, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. After Robert passed, I sat down with an estate attorney. We placed the brownstone, the lot, and all the equity into an irrevocable trust. Do you know what that means, Arthur? You're the wealth manager. Explain it to them. Arthur swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the exit. It means It means she doesn't own the house anymore. The trust owns it. Exactly, Melissa smiled, a terrifying, victorious expression. I am merely the lifetime beneficiary. I have the right to live there until I draw my last breath. But the deed is locked. I cannot sell it. I cannot take a loan against it. And I certainly cannot grant a power of attorney to liquidate it. The house is legally insulated from all creditors, all lawsuits, and, she looked dead at Chloe, all greedy daughters-in-law. Chloe's mouth fell open. She looked from Melissa to the binder, then to Arthur. Is she lying? Arthur, tell me she's lying. If it's a properly executed irrevocable trust, Chloe, Arthur mumbled, hastily packing his briefcase. There's nothing I can do. The asset is untouchable. The power of attorney is useless. He stood up, not looking at any of them. I have to go. This is completely out of my purview. Arthur practically sprinted out of the restaurant, abandoning the sinking ship. At the table, total devastation settled over Marcus and Chloe. The realization hit them with the force of a freight train. There was no money. There was no bailout. The $3 million they had been banking on was an impenetrable fortress. Marcus buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with violent, pathetic sobs. He had sold his soul, betrayed the only person who truly loved him, and he was still going to lose everything. Chloe stared at Melissa, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and absolute terror. The pristine corporate mask had melted away, leaving a desperate woman staring down the barrel of financial ruin and public humiliation. You planned this, Chloe hissed, venom dripping from every word. You set us up. No, Chloe, Melissa said, standing up from the table. She smoothed the front of her emerald dress, picking up her tote bag. I just read the fine print. Something you should have done before you tried to play a game you didn't understand. Melissa looked down at her son one last time. I love you, Marcus, but you made your bed with thieves. Now you have to lie in it. She reached into her purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it on top of the useless legal documents. For the scallops, she said. Without looking back, Melissa turned and walked out of the dining room, her head held high, leaving the ruins of their conspiracy burning behind her. The silence in the Tribeca apartment over the next 48 hours was toxic. It wasn't the quiet of a peaceful home, but the pressurized, suffocating stillness of a submarine sinking below its crushed depth. Marcus had barely moved from the leather sofa since they returned from Le Bernardin. He sat in the same clothes, staring blankly at the Manhattan skyline, a man waiting for the executioner's axe. Vanguard Capital's deadline was looming, a rapidly ticking clock that echoed in his hollow chest. Every time his phone buzzed, he flinched, expecting it to be Richard Vance informing him that the district attorney had received the falsified loan documents. Chloe, however, did not paralyze. She mobilized. For Chloe, defeat was a foreign language she refused to learn. The revelation of Melissa's irrevocable trust had been a devastating blow, shattering her initial, elegant strategy. But as she paced the length of their pristine living room, her mind operated like a supercomputer rerouting around a firewall. If she couldn't trick the old woman into handing over the keys, she would have to get the state of New York to pry them from her cold, stubborn hands. On Tuesday morning, while Marcus was locked in the guest bedroom dry-heaving from panic, Chloe sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Elias Thorne. Thorne was not a wealth manager like the cowardly Arthur Sterling. He was a litigator, a sharp-toothed, high-priced attorney who specialized in the dark, murky waters of elder law and contested estates. He sat behind his massive desk, his fingers steepled, listening intently as Chloe laid out the situation, omitting Marcus's impending criminal charges and framing the narrative entirely around Melissa's rapid mental decline. An irrevocable trust is notoriously difficult to pierce, Mrs. Sterling, Thorne explained, his voice like dry gravel. The courts view them as ironclad. However, there is a battering ram available, provided you have the stomach for it. I have the stomach for whatever gets that property liquidated, Chloe replied, her eyes flat and unblinking. Thorne offered a thin, predatory smile. Article 81 of the New York Mental Hygiene Law. Guardianship. If we can prove to a judge that your mother-in-law is suffering from severe cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's, or severe paranoia, and that she is a danger to herself and her own estate, the court can appoint a guardian. Specifically, your husband. Chloe leaned forward, the scent of blood in the water. And if Marcus is granted guardianship? A court-appointed guardian supersedes the trustee if it is deemed medically and financially necessary for the ward's survival, Thorne explained. If we argue that she requires a specialized 24-hour memory care facility that costs $20,000 a month, the court can order the trust to be dissolved and the brownstone sold to fund her medical care. But to get an Article 81 hearing expedited, we need compelling medical evidence, not just hearsay about a forgotten name. Chloe's mind raced. I have a contact, a private psychiatrist who consults for our firm's executive wellness program. He owes me a considerable favor. If I brief him on her symptoms, he can provide a sworn affidavit stating she requires immediate intervention. Falsifying medical evaluations is a felony, Mrs. Sterling, Thorne warned softly, though there was no moral objection in his tone, only a legal caution. It's not falsifying if it's a preliminary diagnostic opinion based on familial reports, Chloe countered smoothly, her corporate training kicking in. We are just deeply concerned relatives acting in an emergency capacity. Thorne nodded slowly. Get me the affidavit. I will file an order to show cause by Friday. We will drag her into a courtroom, paint her as a confused, combative old woman, and strip her of her autonomy. Once the gavel falls, the house is yours to sell. Across the East River, in the sunlit kitchen of the Brooklyn brownstone, Melissa was pouring a second cup of black coffee when the process server knocked on her door. She opened it to find a young man in a windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. Melissa Sterling? He asked. Yes. You've been served. He handed her the envelope and practically jogged down the stoop. Melissa carried the envelope back to the kitchen table. She didn't panic. She pulled a butter knife from the drawer, slit the seal, and extracted the legal documents. The bold black header of the New York State Supreme Court glared back at her. Petition for the appointment of a guardian of the person and property under Article 81 of the Mental Hygiene Law. Petitioner, Marcus Sterling. Alleged incapacitated person, Melissa Sterling. She read through the pages, her jaw tightening. There were accusations of her wandering the streets at night, of leaving the gas on, of aggressive outbursts, and a sworn affidavit from a Dr. Philip Aris, a man she had never met, stating that based on familial reports, she exhibited advanced signs of Lewy body dementia and required immediate institutionalization. They were not just trying to take her house anymore. They were trying to erase her legally. They were attempting to reduce Melissa, a woman who had saved lives in an emergency room for 3 decades, into a ghost in her own life. She picked up her phone and dialed Robert Hayes. Robert, she said when the lawyer answered. They filed for guardianship. Article 81. A heavy sigh came through the receiver. I warned you Chloe was a shark, Melissa. She found the only loophole. When is the hearing? Next Wednesday. It's been expedited. They have a judge who moves fast, Robert noted, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background as he already began pulling up the docket. Listen to me, Melissa. This is going to be ugly. They are going to put you on the stand and try to confuse you, anger you, and make you look exactly like the paranoid, aggressive dementia patient they claim you are. If a judge believes you are incapacitated, the trust won't protect you. The court will order the house sold to pay for a care facility. Robert, Melissa's voice was as calm and deep as the ocean. I have stared down gang members bleeding out in my ER who threatened to kill me. I am not intimidated by a girl in a designer suit and a crooked lawyer. You prepare the defense. I will be ready. She hung up the phone and looked at the framed photo of Robert and young Marcus on the mantel. A profound, aching sorrow washed over her. Her son's name was on the petition. He had signed the document declaring his own mother insane. The betrayal was absolute. But as she looked at the petition again, Melissa's clinical intuition flared. The speed of this maneuver, the sheer desperation of it. Chloe was moving too fast, too recklessly. People only acted with such blatant disregard for the law when they had a secondary motive. What are you really hiding, Chloe? Melissa whispered to the empty room. While Melissa prepared for war, Marcus was living in a purgatory of his own making. It was Thursday afternoon. Chloe was out, attending another strategic meeting with Thorne. Marcus was in the apartment's sleek home office, surrounded by cardboard boxes. Vanguard was coming. He knew it was over. He was packing up the few personal items from his desk, preparing for the inevitable moment when the authorities would seize his assets. He needed his old tax returns, the legitimate ones from 3 years ago, to hand over to whatever public defender he would eventually be assigned. Chloe had always managed their personal finances, keeping everything meticulously organized in a locked, fireproof filing cabinet in the corner of the office. Marcus searched Chloe's desk for the key but found nothing. Frustration, fueled by days of suffocating anxiety, boiled over. He grabbed a heavy steel letter opener, jammed it into the lock of the filing cabinet, and violently wrenched it sideways. The cheap metal locking mechanism snapped with a sharp crack. He pulled the top drawer open. It was filled with impeccably labeled folders: insurance, OmniSync docs, joint accounts. He bypassed them, opening the bottom drawer. This drawer was different. There were only 2 folders inside, neither of them labeled. Curiosity, tinged with a sudden icy dread, prompted Marcus to pull out the first folder. He opened it on his desk. It was a drafted contract, dense with real estate legalese. Consulting and finder's fee agreement between Apex Development Partners, LLC, and CS Consulting, sole proprietorship of Chloe Sterling. Marcus's eyes scanned the document, his heart hammering against his ribs. Apex Development was the aggressive real estate firm buying up properties in Bedford-Stuyvesant. The contract outlined a devastating agreement. If Chloe could secure the off-market acquisition of the brownstone located at Melissa's exact address, Apex Development would pay her a finder's fee equal to 20% of the final sale price. 20% of $3 million was $600,000. But that wasn't the detail that stopped Marcus's breathing. The contract explicitly stated that the funds were to be wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under Chloe's sole proprietorship. None of this money was designated to pay off Vanguard Capital. Marcus felt a cold sweat break out across his neck. He reached into the cabinet with shaking hands and pulled out the second bright yellow manila envelope. It was unsealed. He tipped it over, and a thick stack of papers slid onto the desk. Supreme Court of the State of New York. Action for divorce. Plaintiff, Chloe Sterling. Defendant, Marcus Sterling. The documents were already signed by Chloe and notarized. The date next to her signature was from 3 weeks ago, before they had even gone to Melissa's house for Sunday dinner. Marcus stared at the divorce petition, his vision blurring. The room began to spin. The pieces of the puzzle, horrifying and cruel, snapped into perfect, devastating alignment. Chloe had never intended to save him. She knew the OmniSync ship was sinking, and she was securing her own lifeboat. Her plan was a masterpiece of sociopathic brilliance. She was using Marcus's desperation to force his mother to sell the brownstone. Once the house was liquidated, the funds would theoretically go into their joint account to pay Vanguard. But Chloe had the Cayman Islands account set up. She was going to take her $600,000 kickback from Apex Development, drain whatever was left from the sale of the house, file the divorce papers, and vanish. She was going to leave Marcus to face Vanguard Capital and the federal prosecutors alone. He would go to prison, Melissa would be locked in a psychiatric facility, and Chloe would be sitting on a beach with millions of dollars, entirely insulated from the wreckage. He was not her husband. He was her patsy. The realization hit Marcus with the physical force of a car crash. He fell back into his desk chair, gasping for air. The sheer magnitude of his own stupidity, his own cowardice, crushed him. He had betrayed the woman who had given him life, who had loved him unconditionally, for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a disposable stepping stone. He remembered Melissa's words at the restaurant. "I would have given you the blood from my veins, Marcus, if you had come to me as a man." He looked at the divorce papers. He looked at the Apex Development contract. Then he looked at his own reflection in the darkened computer monitor. He saw a weak, pathetic boy who had let a monster into his mother's home. The paralyzing fear of federal prison, the terror that had dictated his every action for the past month, suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by something entirely new, a dark, burning, volcanic rage. It wasn't directed just at Chloe. It was directed at himself. Marcus slowly gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folders. He didn't tear them up. He didn't confront Chloe when she walked through the front door an hour later. When Chloe returned, buzzing with the adrenaline of her legal machinations, she found Marcus sitting quietly on the sofa. "Elias got the hearing expedited for Wednesday," Chloe announced, pouring herself a glass of wine. "We're going to put her on the stand. We just need you to play the heartbroken, concerned son. Can you do that, Marcus? Can you hold it together for 1 hour in front of a judge?" Marcus looked at his wife. He saw the cold reptilian calculation behind her beautiful eyes. He felt a sickening calm wash over him. Yes, Marcus said, his voice eerily steady. I'll be ready for Wednesday. I know exactly what I need to do. Chloe smiled, taking a sip of her wine. Good. Once this is over, everything is going to change for us. You have no idea, Marcus whispered, turning his gaze back to the window. He had 48 hours until the guardianship hearing. He knew he was still going to lose his company. He knew he was likely going to prison. But he also knew with absolute, unwavering certainty that Chloe was going down with him, and his mother's brownstone would remain untouched. It was time to finally be his mother's son. The courtroom of the New York State Supreme Court was a cathedral of cold, polished mahogany and sterile fluorescent lighting. It was a space designed to strip away the warmth of human context and reduce lives to statutes, clauses, and gavels. Melissa sat at the defendant's table, her posture impeccably straight. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, her silver hair neatly pinned back, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable dignity. Beside her sat Robert Hayes, his briefcase open, a fortress of legal briefs arrayed before him. Across the aisle, at the petitioner's table, the contrast was stark. Chloe wore a demure, conservative navy dress, her makeup intentionally muted to play the role of the exhausted, deeply concerned daughter-in-law. Beside her, Elias Thorne looked like a shark smelling a drop of blood in the water. And then there was Marcus. He sat slightly apart from his wife, staring at the grain of the wooden table. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in the last 2 days. The tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, his shoulders bowed under an invisible, crushing weight. Judge Miriam Abernathy, a woman with iron gray hair and a reputation for possessing zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, took the bench. The heavy thud of her gavel echoed off the high ceilings. This is the matter of the petition for guardianship under Article 81, regarding Melissa Sterling, Judge Abernathy announced, adjusting her reading glasses. Mr. Thorne, I have reviewed your emergency petition and the accompanying medical affidavit. You are seeking to strip the respondent of her legal autonomy, dissolve an established irrevocable trust, and force the liquidation of her primary residence. These are extreme measures. Let us hear your justification. Elias Thorne stood, buttoning his suit jacket. He walked to the center of the floor, his voice resonating with practiced theatrical sorrow. Your Honor, we are not here to take anything from Melissa Sterling. We are here to save her from herself, Thorne began. The respondent is suffering from rapidly advancing cognitive decline, specifically undiagnosed Lewy body dementia, as indicated by the sworn affidavit of Dr. Philip Aries. She is living alone in a massive multi-story property. She is combative, forgetful, and highly vulnerable. Her son, Marcus Sterling, is simply asking this court to grant him the authority to protect his mother, to transition her into a specialized memory care facility, and to utilize her locked idle assets to fund the 24-hour medical care she so desperately requires. Thorne spent the next 20 minutes painting a masterpiece of fiction. He twisted Melissa's independence into isolation. He weaponized her age. He called Chloe to the stand, where the young woman delivered an Oscar-worthy performance, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue as she recounted fabricated stories of Melissa leaving the stove on and wandering the neighborhood in her nightgown. Melissa watched the performance with a chilling calmness. She didn't interrupt. She didn't show anger. She simply let them weave their rope. And finally, Your Honor, Thorne said, turning back to his table, I call the petitioner, Marcus Sterling, to the stand. Marcus stood up slowly. He looked like a man walking to the electric chair. He moved toward the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As he sat down, he finally lifted his eyes and looked across the room. His eyes met Melissa's. In that fleeting second, a profound, silent conversation passed between mother and son. Melissa did not look at him with hatred, nor did she look at him with a mother's desperate plea for mercy. She looked at him with the expectation of a matriarch waiting to see if the boy she raised had finally become a man. Mr. Sterling, Thorne began, leaning against the podium. You love your mother, don't you? Yes, Marcus whispered into the microphone. And it breaks your heart to see her mind failing her? Marcus hesitated. He looked at Chloe, who offered him a tight, encouraging nod. Just play the part, her eyes commanded. Just lie, and we walk away rich. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. His fingers closed around a thick, folded manila envelope. The cold reality of the metal letter opener he had used to break Chloe's lock flashed in his mind. The suffocating fear of federal prison paled in comparison to the spiritual death he would suffer if he went through with this. Mr. Sterling? Thorne prompted, a hint of impatience creeping into his smooth voice. I asked, does it break your heart to see her mind fail? My mother's mind is not failing, Marcus said. His voice was no longer a whisper. It rang out, clear and steady, echoing through the silent courtroom. Thorne froze. Chloe's encouraging smile instantly shattered. Excuse me? Thorne recovered quickly, offering a patronizing chuckle. Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional. I am not emotional. I am committing perjury, Marcus stated, cutting the lawyer off. He stood up from the witness chair. My mother is not suffering from dementia. She doesn't forget names, and she doesn't leave the stove on. She is sharper than anyone in this room. Judge Abernathy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing sharply. Mr. Sterling, you are under oath. Do you understand what you are saying? You signed the petition stating she was incapacitated. I signed it because my wife told me to, Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice trembling now, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of absolute truth. I am in massive financial debt to a predatory equity firm called Vanguard Capital. I am facing federal indictment for wire fraud. We needed $3 million to save my company and keep me out of prison. But my mother's house is in an irrevocable trust, so we couldn't just take it. My wife, Chloe, hired Mr. Thorne and paid a doctor who has never even met my mother to falsify an affidavit so we could steal her house legally. The courtroom erupted. Objection! Your Honor, this is absurd. The witness is having a breakdown, Thorne bellowed, his face turning a mottled crimson. Shut up, Mr. Thorne, Judge Abernathy snapped, slamming her gavel with the force of a thunderclap. Sit down immediately. She turned her furious gaze to Marcus. Mr. Sterling, these are incredibly severe accusations. Do you have any proof of this conspiracy, or are you just wasting this court's time? I have proof, Your Honor, Marcus said. He pulled the folded manila envelope from his jacket and stepped down from the stand, walking it directly to the bailiff, who handed it up to the judge. What is this? Judge Abernathy asked, opening the envelope. That is a consulting and finder's fee agreement, Marcus explained, turning to look directly at Chloe, whose face had drained of all blood, leaving her looking like a wax statue. Between my wife, Chloe Sterling, and Apex Development Partners. It guarantees her a $600,000 kickback, wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the moment she successfully forces the sale of my mother's property. A collective gasp echoed from the sparse gallery. Robert Hayes sat back in his chair, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Melissa remained perfectly still, though a single tear finally escaped, tracking down her cheek. Not a tear of sorrow, but of profound relief. Her son had stepped back from the abyss. And the second document, Your Honor, Marcus continued, his voice breaking slightly, is a petition for divorce, signed and notarized by my wife 3 weeks ago. She never intended to use the house money to pay off my debt. She intended to lock my mother in an asylum, take her kickback, steal the equity, and leave me to go to federal prison alone. Marcus, you son of a bitch! Chloe shrieked, abandoning all pretense of the sophisticated corporate professional. She leapt up from her chair, her face contorted with feral rage, lunging toward him before Thorne grabbed her arm to hold her back. You weak, pathetic loser, I was trying to save us. Bang, bang, bang. The judge's gavel struck like a machine gun. Bailiff, restrain the petitioner, Judge Abernathy roared. 2 armed court officers immediately stepped behind Chloe, forcing her back into her chair. The judge looked down at the documents, her face a mask of absolute judicial fury. She looked at Thorne, who was already inching away from his own client, realizing his career was suddenly on the line. I have been on this bench for 22 years, Judge Abernathy said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. And this is the most despicable, coordinated attempt at elder abuse and real estate fraud I have ever witnessed. Petition denied. With extreme prejudice. She pointed a finger at Chloe and Thorne. I am immediately forwarding this transcript, these documents, and the medical affidavit of Dr. Philip Aris to the district attorney's office. You are not leaving this courthouse until you have been questioned regarding conspiracy, perjury, and fraud. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell one last time, sealing their fate. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet, bathed in the soft gray light of a New York afternoon. Marcus stood by the heavy oak doors, staring blankly at the marble floor. Inside the courtroom, Chloe was screaming at her lawyer while the bailiff stood watch. Marcus felt entirely hollowed out, but for the first time in 2 years, he was not afraid. The suffocating anxiety of the Vanguard debt was still there, but the rot in his soul had been excised. The heavy doors opened and Melissa walked out, followed by Robert Hayes. Marcus couldn't look his mother in the eye. He fell to his knees on the cold marble, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry, Ma," he sobbed, the sound echoing down the empty corridor. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't fix it. I know I deserve what's coming. I'm going to walk down to the federal prosecutor's office right now and turn myself in for the Vanguard fraud. I won't run anymore." Melissa looked down at her son. She did not reach out to touch him immediately. She let him feel the weight of his actions. "Stand up, Marcus," she commanded gently. Marcus wiped his face and slowly stood, looking like a broken shell of the arrogant tech founder he once was. "You aren't going to the federal prosecutor," Melissa said. Marcus blinked, confused. "Ma, I have to. Vanguard gave me 30 days. The deadline is tomorrow. They have the fraudulent asset declarations. If I don't turn myself in, they'll send the FBI to my door." "Vanguard Capital isn't going to send anyone to your door, Marcus," Robert Hayes interjected, stepping forward and opening his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper with a notary seal and handed it to Marcus. Marcus took the paper. His eyes scanned the text, struggling to comprehend the legal jargon. Assignment of debt. Satisfaction of lien. Transfer of guarantee. "I don't understand," Marcus whispered. "What is this?" "It's your bridge loan," Melissa said, her voice steady and warm. "I bought it." Marcus's head snapped up, his jaw dropping. You what?" "Ma, it was $800,000, plus interest. You don't have that kind of liquid cash." "No, I didn't," Melissa admitted. "But Vanguard is a predatory firm. They rely on fear. When Robert contacted them last week, acting on behalf of an anonymous buyer, he made it clear that you were preparing to declare total bankruptcy and face criminal charges. If you went to prison, Vanguard would get absolutely nothing. 0 cents on the dollar." Robert Hayes smiled grimly. "So we offered them a settlement, a guaranteed immediate cash buyout to take the toxic debt off their books. They settled for $400,000 to release the personal guarantee and hand over the original falsified declarations." "But where did you get $400,000? Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Melissa looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fierce, protective love of a mother, mixed with the iron discipline of a matriarch. "I liquidated my entire 401k. I cashed in your father's life insurance policy. And I took a hard money loan from the Community Church Fund, underwritten by Evelyn and the Neighborhood Association. I gambled everything I had left on the hope that when you sat in that witness chair, you would finally remember who raised you." Marcus stared at her, the magnitude of her sacrifice hitting him like a physical blow. She had risked her entire financial safety net, everything she had built outside of the brownstone, to save him from the wolves, even while he was plotting with a viper to steal her home. "Ma, I can't let you do this. I'll never be able to pay you back. I'm ruined." "You are ruined in Manhattan, Marcus," Melissa corrected him. "But you are not dead. You are going to file for corporate bankruptcy for OmniSync. You are going to sign the divorce papers. And then you are going to pack a single suitcase and move into the basement apartment of my brownstone." Marcus stared at her, wide-eyed. "You owe me $400,000, Marcus, plus 5% interest," Melissa stated, her tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "You are going to get a job, a real job. You will pay me rent, and you will pay down your debt every single month. You are going to sweep my stoop. You are going to help me cook on Sundays, and you are going to learn what it actually means to build a legacy brick by brick without lying, cheating, or looking for shortcuts. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a pardon. It was a sentence. But it was a sentence of redemption, not destruction. Marcus looked at the assignment of debt in his hand. He looked at the brilliant, terrifying, loving woman who had brought him into the world and just pulled him back from the edge of hell. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but this time they were tears of profound gratitude. "Yes, Ma," Marcus whispered, nodding his head. "I understand." Melissa finally stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her son, pulling him into a deep, forgiving embrace. "Let's go home, baby. We have a lot of work to do." 6 months later, the late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the Bedford-Stuyvesant brownstone. On the front stoop, Marcus, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, was sweeping away the autumn leaves. His face was leaner, the arrogant tech bro facade replaced by the quiet humility of a man working a grueling middle management job at a local logistics firm. He was exhausted, but for the first time in years, he slept soundly at night. Inside the house, the scent of smoked turkey and simmering collard greens filled the air. But the living room was not set up for a simple family dinner. 24 folding chairs were arranged in semicircles, filled with elderly black men and women from the neighborhood. At the front of the room, standing beside a whiteboard, was Melissa. Robert Hayes sat at the desk nearby, organizing stacks of legal forms. Gentrification isn't just about coffee shops and rising taxes, Melissa was saying to the captivated audience, her voice ringing with passion and experience. It's about separating us from our generational wealth. And sometimes the people trying to take it aren't just developers. Sometimes it's the people sitting at our own dinner tables who have lost their way. She picked up a marker and wrote 2 words on the board. Irrevocable trust. They count on us being uninformed, Melissa continued, looking around the room at her friends and neighbors. They count on our fear of the legal system. But today, Mr. Hayes and I are going to show you how to lock your doors. We are going to show you how to build a fortress around your legacy so that no predatory lender, no greedy developer, and no misguided relative can ever take what you bled to build. Outside, Marcus paused his sweeping. He listened to his mother's voice carrying through the open window, strong, resilient, and unbreakable. Chloe was currently facing a mountain of legal trouble and a messy divorce. The OmniSync startup was a distant memory. But as Marcus looked up at the sturdy brick facade of his family home, he realized he hadn't lost everything. He had lost an illusion, and in return his mother had given him back his soul.